Welcome to the National Press Foundation, Dorothy Brown. We're so happy to have you here. Dorothy is the, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, the Asa Griggs Candler Professor of Law at Emory University and author of a new book called The Whiteness of Wealth, which is getting a lot of attention in the media. You were sent the link to the Washington Post review. You feel free to interrupt. Dorothy teaches for a living, and she's happy to be interrupted with questions, so just throw them in the chat. And Dorothy, over to you.
Great, thanks, Sonni. I'm so delighted to be here. So I want to talk about, and yes, I totally want to be interrupted with questions. I think it's more interesting for everyone, and this makes sure you get any questions that you have answered. So I want to talk about first the origin story of the book. So I wrote a book about race and tax, but how did I get thinking about race and tax? I read a piece of scholarship that a mentor of mine wrote, and in the article it said, how do you know there isn't a race and tax problem if you don't look? And I went into tax law because I believed it had nothing to do with race. So when I saw those lines, I went, what? Race and tax? And since it was a mentor and someone I looked up to who I thought was brilliant, I said, well, he may be onto something. So I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And that's when I discovered that the IRS does not publish statistics by race. And I thought, how am I ever going to do anything about race and tax if I can't go where people normally go to get tax statistics? So I became kind of a detective, which is something I'm going to basically argue that you all should think about doing as well. So what I did then was everything I read, I put my tax lenses on and I tried to read everything I could about race. And there was a U.S. Commission on Civil Rights report that I think the title was The Economic Status of Black Women. And I'm reading it, and there's a line in there that says, married Black women contribute 41% to household income, and married white women contribute 29%. Now, to anyone else, they'd say, oh, that's interesting. I mean, we know married Black women, we know Black women generally are in the workforce to a higher percentage than white women, so that might not have been earth-shattering. But to me, it was gold, because what I knew is how the tax laws operate based on how spouses contribute to household income. And if you're in a 100-0 or 90-10 household where one spouse is contributing the overwhelming percentage to household income, you get a tax cut when you get married. If, however, you're in a household where the contribution is split 40-60 or 50-50, your taxes go up. So looking at that statistic told me married Black couples would be more likely to pay a tax penalty when they got married and a higher tax penalty than their white peers. So that's just one line, one sentence. That's not enough to produce any kind of real scholarship, but it was enough to get me thinking. And what it got me thinking was, how could I get another proxy for tax statistics, right? Because remember, the IRS doesn't collect and publish. So I could have, once I found that out, said, oh, I guess I can't do it. But I'm fairly determined. So I didn't decide to back off then. And what I did was I went to Census Bureau data. The Census Bureau collects a lot of data on household income, and it includes spousal contributions. So at the time, I was teaching at the University of Cincinnati, and they had an Institute for Policy Research that at the time would perform numbers crunching for free. So I was able to work with a numbers cruncher and said, here's what I want. I want married Black couples, married white couples, how the spouses contribute to household income, and show me what you got. Well, it took a really long time to get it because the data set was so large that it kept crashing the system, but eventually we got it. And what it showed was pretty much at all income levels, married Black couples were more likely to be in that 60-40, 50-50 category. And married white couples were more likely to be in the 100-0, 90-10. So then I was able to produce some scholarship based on that, right? But I got pushback. Well, just because you can find it in the joint return doesn't mean it's anywhere else. In fact, I was at a law professor conference and I presented my marriage penalty work. And the first comment was directed at me, and it said, and he said, a tax professor, Dorothy, everybody knows your work is irrelevant because Blacks are poor and don't pay a lot in taxes. So that's kind of an example of the pushback that I got. And really, he was wrong, even from a math perspective, because most Blacks are not poor. So this notion that because Blacks are poor, they don't pay a lot in taxes, 78% of us are not poor. And what my book, The Whiteness of Wealth, showed like 20 years later was Black Americans are more likely to pay higher taxes than white Americans, even when they do the same thing, like getting married. But how do you eat an elephant one spoonful at a time, right? The other criticism I got was, well, you may have shown it in the joint return, but that doesn't mean the tax code generally has a racially disparate impact. And I wish you would just, wait until you studied everything. Well, as an academic, I need to publish, and I need to publish in order to get tenure. So here, this book is like 20 years after I started. I wouldn't have had a job had I waited 20 years to put this book together. So what I did was I looked in different areas. I started with marriage. I talked about jobs and who gets employer provided retirement accounts and health benefits by race. I looked at home ownership. I think of all the pieces I wrote, the home ownership piece was the one that got me the most pushback, primarily from white law professors. And here's why. So homeownership, again, there's no tax data that the IRS publishes, but there's a lot of sociology research about home values, which people live in which neighborhood. So I was able to show that white homeowners generally lived in overwhelmingly white homogeneous communities. Black homeowners overwhelmingly live in all Black or racially diverse neighborhoods. And home ownership appreciation is tied to the race of your neighbors. So if you have too many Black neighbors, the value of the property in that neighborhood decreases. And the research actually quantifies it. When more than 10% of your neighbors are Black, you lose about 16% of your home value. And as the percentage of Black neighbors increases, the percentage of home value you lose also increases. So when I would present this to law professors, they wanted to push back. Well, it's not because of race, it's because of property values, right? People are concerned with property values. And my response is, you may be concerned with property values, but you're acting just like somebody who didn't want to live next to Black Americans. So as a homeowner, I'm being negatively impacted. So one of the things I learned is to expect pushback and to respond to it, right? So with homeownership, the pushback has generally been, it's not race, or what I've gotten since the book has been published is, well, Dorothy, you don't talk about crime rates, and that's why white people don't want to live with Black people. Well, but you're saying is all Black people are criminals, which is racist, right? So, so the defense I get in the emails that I receive is it's not race, it's crime, but it's crime as a proxy for race. So it doesn't really, people feel better when they say it's crime, but it's still just as racist as saying I don't want to live next to Black people because they're criminals. Okay, so homeownership is one of those hot button issues. But I was able to find a wealth of information in the sociology area around homeownership. So that, yes, a majority of white Americans are homeowners and a majority of Black and Latino Americans are renters. But when you compare white homeowners to Black homeowners, we still see tax subsidies operating in a way that benefits white homeowners. How does that happen? Well, there's a tax break if you sell your home for a gain. If you're married, you can get $500,000 of income from the gain tax-free. And if you're single, $250,000. So you would say, well, that just means when Black homeowners sell, they can have as much gain tax-free as white homeowners. Except most Black homeowners don't live in the neighborhoods with the most appreciation. As a result, when Black Americans sell their homes, they get less appreciation tax-free and are more likely to sell our homes for a loss. And how does tax law treat losses on the sale of homes? No deduction, no tax break. So the tax break for gain, which benefits white homeowners, there isn't a tax break for losses. And that is one other example of how Black Americans, Black homeowners are disadvantaged. So even when we do the right thing, we buy homes, we still don't have it as a wealth building vehicle the way white Americans have. And I will say this, a lot of progressive white scholars and progressive white think tank analysts push home ownership and Democratic presidential nominees push home ownership as a way to decrease the racial wealth gap. And they never acknowledge that homeownership will never give as much to a Black homeowner as it will a white homeowner unless the Black homeowner lives in an all-white neighborhood. And if all Black people start living in all white neighborhoods, you will see too many of us will live in a particular neighborhood and then the values will decrease. So let me give you an example. Richard Rothstein wrote this wonderful book called The Color of Law. And I'm guessing many of you have heard of it. And he has this thought experiment. So Levittown, New York was based on racism. It was created at a time when Black Americans were expressly prevented from getting FHA insured loans. Therefore, they couldn't buy, and therefore Levittown, New York was virtually all white. Well, fast forward to 2018 or whenever the book came out. It's still like 1.7% Black. It's still pretty much all white. But he came up with a proposal that said, here's how we could give wealth to Black Americans. We'd have the government buy property in Levittown and then basically transfer it to Black Americans so they'd have this built-in equity. And he recognized that politically it wouldn't be feasible. But in my book, I explain how it's worse than that. It would never work. People live in Levittown because they're comfortable with 1.7% Black neighbors. If there is suddenly a rush of Black neighbors in that area, we know precisely what would happen. White homeowners would sell, and the price of the homes would come down as more Black Americans moved into the neighborhood. So that's an example where progressive, well-meaning white think tank, white intellectuals miss how systemic racism is everywhere and permeates the homeowning system. It permeates the wealth building system. And I'll take a detour to talk about the ProPublica report that just came out that has steam coming out of my ears, because here's an article about wealth where they use 4 or 5 examples, and all the examples are white men, and they never once mention race. The system for building wealth in America is very pro-white wealth. And there's a bigger story that ProPublica is missing by ignoring race. So I don't even understand. Like I said, I read the story from beginning to end. I've read it more than once. Steam still comes out of my ears. How do you write a story that has 5 white guys and you don't mention race or gender, right? Because this list is going to be gendered. We don't have all 25 names. Well, they have all the returns, but they're going to talk about 25. The top 25 names are overwhelmingly white and male. I know this without even having them tell me who they are. But the 4 or 5 examples they used were white men. Why is that? So I think one of the things that gets missed when we talk about wealth, when we talk about tax policy, is how important race is to who can build wealth. Okay, so I see a question. Does my research focus on single family houses, um, as well as in large cities. Yes, so the sociology research that's out there is on large cities, small cities, single family homes. I'm pretty sure owner occupied condos as well. It's basically a homeowner broadly defined, because think about it. If we just made it single family homes, we could never talk about New York City, right? And other cities like that where most people are living in condos and co-ops. So yes, the research, and to be clear, I piggyback off of the sociology research that I discovered. When I say discovered, I had a sociology colleague at Emory who read a draft of my homeownership piece and said, Dorothy, you should look at this, and the rest is history. So I find talking to people in other disciplines really, really helpful to get me thinking about what's important. Like history is really important to telling this story. Again, another part of and ProPublica is going to do other pieces, so this may be in there. But what I found in the research for my book is, how did these tax provisions come into play? What a lot of these provisions, our modern income tax system, for example, goes back to 1913. And just ask yourself, what was 1913 like in America, right? In 1913, the only people who paid taxes were rich white people. How did that happen, right? We got a progressive tax system that really was progressive. And as a result, the only people who pay taxes were rich white people. So if the only people paying taxes are rich and white and they have resources, what do you think they're going to do to the tax code? Yeah, they're going to create all kinds of exemptions and deductions and loopholes. And my book basically tells like story after story after story. How did we get a joint return? A rich white couple in Seattle, Henry and Charlotte Seaborn, who didn't like the fact that they were paying too much in taxes in 1927, right? So it just, to me, makes for a better story and better informs your readers. So with the homeownership piece, I looked at sociology research. With the marriage piece, I looked at Census Bureau data. The college chapter, I looked at Department of Education statistics and other studies. But the college chapter, tracking down the data was the hardest of all of my research. It isn't in one place. There's nothing like in one place. So I had to piece together from different, Brookings did some research on student debt. Georgetown did some research on student debt. So I pieced together, I put together a story from different parts of research in different disciplines to put together the college story, where I basically show that even though, again, if you go to college and you get graduate, you'll get a good job, and that'll be your path towards getting out of solving the racial wealth gap. And it really doesn't. 60% of Black students who start college don't graduate. So that like blew me away. That was the most depressing part of the book for me. In fact, it made me think maybe I shouldn't finish the book. So you have these statistics that show college for Black Americans is experienced very differently than college for white Americans. Black students leave college with debt, oftentimes without a degree. Even when they leave with a degree, Black student debt grows over time. We're more likely to go to grad school. We're more likely to have income-based repayment. We're more likely, Black college graduates are more likely to send money home to their parents than white college graduates, who are more likely to receive money from their parents and then use it to build wealth. So there's a lot of pieces to the racial wealth gap that had not previously been put together. So my book does that. And my book also talks about jobs and these employer provided tax-free benefits like retirement accounts and health insurance. Now, there's this organization, EBRI, I think it's Employee Benefits Research Institute, that has a lot of data on employer provided retirement accounts by race. So I was able to use that and pull it into my research. But as you can see, I look everywhere for information since the IRS doesn't publish statistics on tax by race. And usually there's something. Usually I can find it. Like I said, college took me the longest, but I did ultimately find it. Okay, so I've got another question. I've covered real estate and covering this story. Not yes, yes, yes. Okay, what are you property value disparities? Yes, that's a great question, and I think it's something that reporters could really sink their teeth into because taxes can be dull. You didn't hear it from me, right? Taxes can be dull, and this kind of a story that is keyed off of a family that you find or a homeowner that you find, that story is going to draw the reader in, and it's just going to make it concrete, right? So my book uses Atlanta families. Why? Because showing how the tax law operates in a person's life resonates and people get it. Just talking about this tax-free gain doesn't. So, one thing I know in California, there's a website that shows property rates by area, and the demographics of the various areas. So you see like a home in a really rich white area is paying less in property taxes than a home in a predominantly Black area. I mean, so I would say doing the legwork, what are the property value, what are the property rates is an issue. What are the property value disputes? So there's research that shows nationwide, Black Americans are more likely to pay higher property taxes than white Americans. And if you drill down into your particular jurisdiction, you will see how that happens. One of the pieces is white Americans are more likely to appeal and Black Americans aren't. So just knowing what the appeal process looks like and having that be very opaque is a problem. After the book was published, I actually, the Cook County in Chicago, property tax assessors reached out to me because they are working really hard to minimize the racial disparities, and they wanted to find out how they could do it better. And I was like blown away because that's not what usually you get out of property tax assessors. So, if in your area that isn't happening, um, walk different neighborhoods. We're soon to be post-COVID. And I know years ago, an NPR reporter and I went to a predominantly Black neighborhood outside of Atlanta and started knocking on doors to see who would talk to us. And people talked to us about what the neighborhood was like, how the foreclosed houses down the street impacted them. So you'll be surprised, people don't like being taken advantage of. And when a reporter shows interest, you will be surprised at how helpful people can be, and they like put us on to their neighbors and what about this and what about that. So I actually say reach out and talk to people. I'm easy to find. My on my Emory website, you can send me an email. I can also give you some other ideas. And that goes to anybody listening. I actually like talking to reporters. I particularly like talking to reporters who want to do better. So I'm happy to be a partner. So reach out to me and I can give you other piece of advice, but just talk to people. And you can start with the county property tax assessor's office and see how forthcoming or not forthcoming they are, because that's going to be an important part of the piece. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the appraisal stories, right? So we saw the story outside of in Indiana, where the Black woman's home was really devalued until her friend white husband pretended to be her, and then the housing appraised significantly, like double what it was. That story could be written everywhere. So it's just a question of talking to a homeowner who would be willing to let you in on their experiences. Okay, so I see another question. During the Biden campaign, said suburbs During the campaign, Biden said the suburbs are racially integrated. Some Democrats praise the idea of diverse neighborhoods, but the goal, treat diverse neighborhoods unrealistic. Yeah. So this is a problem. Well, let's put it this way. Suburbs are more racially integrated than they used to be. And now they have this thing called exurbs, which is what happens beyond the suburbs, which are lily white. So inner cities are racially diverse, or perhaps predominantly of color. Then we go to suburbs, some of which are racially integrated. Then we go further out and they are back to almost all white. So it depends on how you define suburbs. But here's the thing. There is a problem when you live in a racially diverse neighborhood, regardless of whether you're a white homeowner or not. As a result, your house is not the financial investment it would be if you lived in an all-white neighborhood. And to me, the solution is we have to figure out a way that the rate of return in a Black neighborhood is the same as the rate of return in a white neighborhood, right? So that's fodder for a whole other issue, or a whole other uh, thought process. But until that happens, I want Black homeowners to be able to live where they want to live. I don't want a Black homeowner to feel like they have to live in an all-white neighborhood for it to be a good financial investment. Why? Because there is a huge price to that. Your neighbor may call the cops on you. If you have children, you have to be vigilant when the school targets your Black child for engaging in the same behavior that white peers do, but their white peers don't get expelled, don't get sent to detention, don't get notes home. So it is a huge price. On the other hand, if you choose to live in a racially diverse or all Black neighborhood, then the price you pay is you don't have the home equity that you would if you lived in an all white neighborhood. And what my college chapter talked about was research that showed wealthy Black Americans cannot protect their children from student debt the way their white peers can, because so much of the wealth of Blacks is in their homes, and they're not getting the equity return that their white peers are. So it's a problem. So I don't think, I presented this paper at a law school, and one of the professors said, Dorothy, and she said it in a positive way. So you're pushing integration. I'm like, no, I'm not pushing integration. No, I'm not. I'm pushing for the fact that we all should be able to live where we want to live and not have to pay a financial price. So I have lived in all white neighborhoods. I have lived in racially diverse neighborhoods. I made different decisions, right? Based on, the first time I moved, I bought a home. It was in an all white neighborhood, and I didn't know anything about this research. My broker told me about this really good deal in a subdivision. So I went for it. I was afraid because I'm like, literally, I was the only Black person on my block. And in a subdivision of 200 families, as I was moving out, I found out there was only one other Black family in the neighborhood. So needless to say, it's a good financial investment. But I will say this, I had the world's best neighbors. I was single. Everybody on the block was married. So they kind of like adopted me as not poor, but as the poor single woman who doesn't have a husband who can fix things. So everybody literally would take care of me when they paved the streets. They got a discount, and they gave me the discount. When somebody bought a snow blower, they would come over and take the snow. So it was a positive experience, but I think that was aberrational. I think whatever luck I had, I think expired when I left. So when I moved to the next home, I bought on a racially diverse street on purpose. And I had problems selling it. And at the time was when I started doing research on homeownership and race. So from that point on, I now consciously think about where I buy my real estate, and I bought one other home since then, and it's the home I'm in now. I'm in my home on Martha's Vineyard, right? Why did I buy a Martha's Vineyard? Because it's really white, but there are a lot of Black people here, right? So over the summer, there are tons of Black Americans who come to hang out on Martha's Vineyard. So it's a white area with a lot of Black people, which means it's a really good financial investment. So that's how I internalize these lessons. I've been doing a lot of talking. Who's got questions?
Well, I have one while
Okay.
everyone else is thinking about it. So you've talked a lot about the market forces that you know, the invisible hand is not exactly colorblind, right?
Right.
But could you talk for a little bit about your view of the legislation proposals that are pending to correct the you know, to correct what is perceived as not a racial imbalance, but a wealth imbalance between the wealthiest and the, you know, the oligarchs and the rest, and also how you think that the progressive proposals from Elizabeth Warren and others for a wealth tax would help or not help the issues that you describe, because many of them are market issues and not actually explicit taxation practices, right?
Right. It's the tax combined or the tax added to the racial market inequality in a way that favors those who the market already favors, right? You could think about having tax policy to disrupt the market racism, but instead it exacerbates it by valuing and giving tax subsidies to the identical people the market values and gives market returns to. So the first thing I'll say, and this is one of my pet peeves, business and tax reporters are not good on race. They've never had to be, and they don't have the skill set, and they don't have the humility, quite honestly, to get better at it. So a lot of the wealth conversation is done in class terms. In fact, I would say this is the takeaway. You know, it's unfortunate that so many Black Americans are poor, because if it wasn't for that, we would have more Black Jeff Bezoses, right? And we don't have more Black Jeff Bezoses because Black people are disproportionately poor. When the reality is we have white Jeff Bezos because the system for building wealth in America has always been white, has always been for white Americans. In fact, white Americans at the beginning had wealth based on the value of enslaved Black people. So we've always had it. So there's this blinders when we talk about wealth, which is like the ProPublica piece, that doesn't take into account race. So Elizabeth Warren is one of the best, not one of, she was the best presidential candidate in my mind that dealt with systemic racism. Elizabeth Warren did not give a stump speech that did not include systemic racism. And she would give it in Iowa like she would give it in Detroit. It didn't matter where she was. I find it curious that when she talks about wealth, she didn't talk about race. So in that area, she's not bringing race into the conversation, but clearly a wealth tax of anyone with more than $50 million of wealth is going to hit white people way more than Black people, right? So to me, part one is who is the tax going to be applied to? And then point two is, what are we going to do with that revenue stream? We're going to get this revenue. What are we going to do with it? And how do we make sure that that revenue stream gets distributed fairly? So, you know, I do think wealth tax would be a tax disproportionately borne by wealthy white Americans, which would be a nice counter to the fact that they have disproportionately benefit from income tax exclusions on gifts and inheritances, for example. So yes, but I'm really disappointed at how the wealth conversation is so classed and not raced.
Okay. We've got a question from Hayat Nouramine. What local policies have you found to be the most harmful toward Black residents and other people of color? As local reporters, should we be looking for any specific laws or lack of laws in place at the state or city level?
So, I think the issues we've discussed around homeownership and property taxes is really important and impacts Black Americans, even renters. So people say, well, the majority of Black Americans and Hispanic Americans are renters, so this property tax thing doesn't really impact them. Except, did anybody believe rent doesn't include property taxes? Of course it does. My landlord passes on property taxes to tenants. So I think it's important to make that connection of how even renters are paying property taxes. So let's see if I can think of what else. Um, this the gig economy. Who's who's a gig employee versus a regular employee? So in my book, I talk about Delta, for example, a couple years ago gave, I think, 2.5 months salary bonus to their workers. But who didn't get that were contract employees. And contract employees at Delta, the people who push folks in wheelchairs, the people who handle your bags, you're already getting a mental image. You know where I'm going. Disproportionately Black Americans work in those contract jobs. So taking a look at, if it's a big company, who's not getting these profit sharing opportunities. If a big company has just been wooed to your area, the property tax abatement that they're getting is going to hurt the school system funding. There was an article years ago, right after Ferguson, the Ferguson uprising. And it talked about the school that Michael Brown went to and how, I think it was Emerson, it was some big company that had been wooed and had a property tax abatement, which meant they were not paying property taxes into that high school, right? So that's an issue that affects significantly Black and brown students that you could write about. Some new company, so the state and local elected leaders take credit when they woo a company into the area. Well, you can tell the other side of that story. What did you woo them with? What property taxes do they not have to pay? And what are you, state and local government, doing to make up for the shortfall? So that's my short answer.
Okay, we have a lot of questions in the
Good.
chat. Okay, let's start with Rachel Riley. By the way, if anyone wants to be unmuted, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you, okay? So Rachel asks, as a white reporter at a local paper now, how can I be better about looking at different issues through a racial equity lens? What questions should I be asking on a regular basis and how can I practice humility?
Okay, so the first thing is follow the data, right? Ask the data question. What is the impact? Whatever policy you're looking at, ask the question, what is the racial impact of the policy? And you may find, like I did, we don't collect the data. Then find a good proxy for it. But sometimes there is data, people just don't ask the question. When you go to sources, so let's say you need an expert in a particular subject area. So there's a go-to expert who happens to be a white guy. That's fine, go to the expert. But then ask the expert, are there women, are there people of color working in this area that I could contact? You can also do Google Scholar and put in some terms and see who pops up. So make sure your sources are diverse, because people will tell you different things based on their experience, and beware of the source everybody goes to as their exclusive. And you're free to talk to them, but don't just go to them. That's another thing. And then don't get deterred when you get pushback, right? Someone will call you a race king or a race baiter, or a race queen. It is what it is. Race is relevant in 2021 in the United States of America. And either you're going to talk about it in a way that helps us move beyond, right, to get to the other side, or you're going to be part of the problem. So honestly, I appreciate the question, and I think you're practicing humility just by asking. And again, I like talking to reporters, so please feel free to follow up with me. And I'm really good about saying I don't know that, but boy, do I know who does. Because I'm really good at getting because I don't think mine should be the only voice, right? I'm practicing when I'm preaching. I'm going to send you to other people as well who should be in your Rolodex. But make sure you have a diverse Rolodex. That's critical.
Okay. Nick Grube covers Hawaii. My colleagues and I often struggle finding disaggregated data on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, including Native Hawaiians. You're nodding. Do you know of any sources that can help us get around this problem? Who does a good job of breaking down AAPI data?
Oh,
If
that's such a
anyone.
good question, because so many times there isn't even any AAPI data because the N was so small they couldn't give it to us without like identifying people who were involved, which is really not what you do. I remember stumbling across some disaggregated AAPI data for my homeownership piece, and I've never seen anything since. That is a great question. So the first thing I'll say is the Census Bureau collects a lot of data. Maybe the Census Bureau may have that data broken out, but off the top of my head, I'm nodding because yep, been there, done that. But there's been more of a push lately. So, I wonder if there are any think tanks in DC that focus on AAPI issues. If there are, I would reach out to them.
Okay. Alex Lacasse asks, my understanding is that tax cuts or exemptions become permanent tax law and aren't subject to budget votes. What would be your to-do list for undoing certain exemptions to make paying taxes more equitable for both income levels and by race?
So the first thing I'd say is the Treasury Department and the IRS need to publish statistics by race. And you do not need an act of Congress to get this done. They just need to do it. President Biden had his first executive order was the racial equity executive order that said racial equity is going to be a centerpiece across the government. Treasury's done nothing. There are other agencies, Department of Labor, in my opinion, that's killing it. The State Department has hired a chief diversity officer, and on their website, they've acknowledged the problems they've had with like an almost all white diplomatic corps. I mean, there are government agencies taking that executive order seriously, and then there's Treasury that is not, in my opinion. So the first thing we need is one, more reporting. How's the racial equity order going? I think somebody should do a story that gives a report card, right? Looks at the various government agencies and says they're doing this, they're doing this. They're not doing too much. So that's number one. In terms of, look, do we have 50 votes for any tax reform in DC? I don't know. But one of the things I said when the 2017 tax cuts were enacted, I told my class, once you have a tax cut, it's really hard to roll it back. And when you look at the Biden proposal for corporate tax reform, they don't roll back that 20% pass-through tax cut that was created in the 2017 Act. Not even Biden is pushing to repeal that because it's hard rolling back a tax cut that's been enacted. And I just don't, hard but not impossible. I'm not convinced there's the political will in DC, but I will say this, there are certainly people in Congress who are interested in the race and tax data piece. I've testified before Congress twice now, and that has come up. And the reason why I testified was because I write about race and tax. So I'm cautiously optimistic that something might get done, but it's going to take some work, and it's going to take keeping this issue in the forefront of people's minds.
Okay, I'm going to hop around a little bit just to clump these many questions by topic. Since you were talking about Congress, let's stick to Congress. Emily Wilkins asks, as a reporter covering Congress in DC, there's a lot of talk right now about proposed tax hikes from the Biden administration related to you can't get it through. How can I look at these policies through a lens of race and who benefits?
Well, okay, let's talk about corporate tax. So corporate tax is, and he's talking about increasing the corporate tax rate, right? It's like from 21% down up to 28, and then they're like, maybe 25. Who gets hit when corporations have to pay more taxes? Well, first of all, let me just say, just because the corporate tax rate goes up doesn't mean corporations are going to pay more taxes, right? There's a reason why you have Apple and these other companies not paying taxes, because the rate is irrelevant if these loopholes continue. But even if we say corporate taxes are going to be increased, who bears the brunt? Now, economists don't all agree, but most people think a portion of it gets hit on labor and a portion of it gets hit on shareholders. I think you can then ask the question, if these tax increases get, and then a portion of it to consumers, if we're talking about a corporation that makes stuff that people buy, you can look at who those different groups are. Who are the workers? Who are the consumers? And who are the shareholders? Again, you know, this is a racialized, who owns stock is a racialized thing. So if you're talking about a hike on shareholders, you're basically talking about a tax hike on rich white people, right? That's generally what you're talking about. So you want to ask, who are the players? And for a lot of this, there is race data out there. It's just a question of asking the question and then finding the information. And I don't know if I should say this out loud, but Google is really helpful.
It's okay. We have people, Google briefers coming. Um, so here's an interesting question from David Cruz at New York Public Radio about tax lien sales. How much has your research examined the rate of tax lien sales in neighborhoods? If so, how different do these rates compare per neighborhood? And what exactly does that reveal?
So I haven't written on this. The Rothstein book talked about it. Bernadette H. who I think is on the faculty at Chicago Kent, has written a lot about this. And you've seen it in predominantly Black neighborhoods, right? So, you know, these are ways that the system strips Black Americans of their wealth that's tied to homeownership in a way you don't see in predominantly white neighborhoods. But Bernadette Etienne would be the person I would send you to.
Could you spell that last name for us?
Yeah. Let me see. Attuene.
Thank you.
And if you Google it, that's close enough. I think that's exactly it, but it's close enough, you'll get to her.
Okay.
And all else fails, send me an email.
Okay. Well, we're actually coming up on the time, but there's one last question I wanted to come back to from Isabel Taft, which is gentrification. So can you talk about how gentrification in many American cities interacts with the racially disparate impacts of the tax code? Are there local and state policy changes that can ensure Black residents in these neighborhoods can build wealth and stay in their homes?
Yeah, that is an excellent, that's what gentrification does. And one of the solutions in my book, I argue for a wealth tax credit that every taxpayer in a household with below median wealth would get a tax credit. And the tax credit could wind up being a refund to you from the government if the tax credit is larger than, what you owed in taxes. And part of the reason or part of the benefit of that would be in these gentrifying neighborhoods. Black homeowners who had been there for years, right, as the wealth of the homes is increasing, their wealth has not gone above the median. They would be able to get a tax break that could enable them to stay in their homes longer. But really, I don't know of any local solution, because the local solution would be to get a fund that would help existing homeowners pay the increased property taxes. And I don't know of any local government that's doing that.
Okay. Dorothy Brown, thank you so much for being with us. And thanks for your generous offer to help all of the journalists on this call, as they, I'm sure, will do many stories on this. So I hope you'll be back soon.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
And we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at the top of the hour with Chiching Huang. And thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.